Hi everyone, Artie here. Welcome back to the Ministry of History. So you're here today with the Minister of History, me, and a fellow tour guide, Tina of Tina's Tours Berlin,
Hi.
who is a deputy minister at the ministry. So today we thought that we would take your questions that you guys have submitted over YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, but also questions that we as tour guides often get asked here on tours in Berlin. So we're going to go through the different questions and we'll hopefully have a nice little chit chat in the process. So question number 1. What attracted you to Berlin and what inspired you to become a tour guide?
Well, for me, it was the history. It was the history that made me want to come. I didn't originally intend to move here. I mean, I come from the subtropical Queensland land of beaches.
Yeah.
I never thought I would live in a place with such a bleak winter. But I did want to come to what had been the capital of Nazi Germany and Socialist East Germany, the divided city. I was really interested in modern history since I was a teenager. And so, of course, I'd read a lot about Berlin. And becoming a tour guide was very kind of lucky stroke of, spontaneous problem solving, I guess.
Spontaneous, we've got a new word there.
Spontaneous,
Love
we're
that.
inventing a new word. I came to Berlin for a 10-day nerdy history deep dive when I was traveling, and I loved it so much.
Was this on your gap year?
Yeah, so after university, I worked for 4 years in social work, saved my money for a trip. And I thought I'd travel and work abroad for a couple of years and then go back to Australia and do my master's. And I'm still here, very happily. And I just loved Berlin so much that I wanted to spend more time here. So I organized work for accommodation in a hostel and then ended up working in a bar. And I was just loving Berlin so much and everything was so in flow that I didn't want to leave. But I couldn't work in my field. I studied psychology without the language. And so I found myself thinking, I really want to stay here, but it requires a career in English. If I'm going to stay, can I make it work somehow? And I saw a company advertising for freelance tour guides. And I thought this would be so fun. I would just get to nonstop learn about Berlin and talk about why it's so interesting, and I would get paid to do it. And that was the happiest, spontaneous career change of all time.
Amazing. And I have to say something similar happened for me as well. I will say, I will say also that, the history for me was a big part of the reason that I moved to Berlin. I actually was never always into history. I actually gave it up for GCSE back in the UK, which is the exam you do when you're 16. So gave it up. And then it was only at university when I was introduced to history through a module about the German occupation of France during the Second World War. And then I became super obsessed with it. And then that led me to come to Berlin for the first time in 2015. Fell in love with the city. I think, as you can agree, it's a very unique city. There's nowhere really quite like it. And I just fell in love with it. And so then ended up moving here in 2017 for the summer. So a bit like you, didn't plan on moving here permanently. And then here I am 7 years later. It's one of those things. I really recommend it to you guys. If you ever get that feeling where you go to a place and you feel like this special connection to it, and you're privileged enough to do so, which we luckily are, just do it. Just move there. And because trust me and you, I'm guessing, do not regret it. Okay. If you feel that connection in your heart to a place, I think that's very, an important nugget of wisdom I can pass on to you. So I moved here in 2017 and I actually started doing pub crawls, actually. I didn't start with tours. And I actually thought, I was 22, 23 at the time. So I obviously thought, oh wow, this is great,
Best
going
job
out,
ever,
best job ever, going out every night getting pissed with tourists. Turns out it gets boring very quickly, and also because about 90% of the people that we were taking out to bars were either Brits or Australians, and when you're taking loads of Brits and Australians out to drink, it's a lot of drinking is involved, and so
raucousness, early 20s drunk Australians.
Exactly.
Ooh, now
exactly.
I don't really know. I don't know what you'd have to pay me to do regular pub crawls with early 20 drunk Australians.
Well, and that's the thing, is that it got very boring very quickly, and I decided I want something a little bit more sustainable, and so the same company offered me to start doing tours, and then here I am. So and just because I just love the history of the city, the history of the city is so special. It's it's all about this recent history, I think. Is you can just really feel there's a fabulous quote from a book by someone called Barney White Spunner, who I interviewed back in the History Buff, who said that the streets of Berlin, they have so many ghosts of Berlin's past. And I think that's a really good way to describe it. And that's kind of why I love the city, because you can still very much feel the sort of tangible effects of its very recent history permeate the city.
I love that word you always use. You say Berlin's history is tangible, and it's such a good description, because it's true. You're walking around the city, or whatever you're doing, it's right there. Like, this recent history is right there.
Yeah, no, and that's what I love about it, and what I'm guessing Tina loves about it as well. So that's what inspired us to become guides. So next question.
What is your favorite era or topic to give tours about, and why?
I mean, I'm going to be like, maybe it's played out and cheesy and corny and, boring.
Basic
and
bitch.
Yeah,
You're going to be a basic bitch. Yeah.
But Nazi Germany in the Cold War. And this is also what, the most of the people want. I would say probably at least 90% of the people who come to Berlin to visit, they probably come mostly for those two eras.
Yeah.
And those are the most popular tours. Specifically, I would say Nazi Germany is probably the most popular is the most popular category of tour. Because, it was probably arguably one of the most catastrophic eras in human history. So I guess it's understandable. Well, because they, started the most devastating war in human history. And obviously the Second World War and the Nazi era still has repercussions that we're feeling very much today. Yeah, I would say the Third Reich, Nazi Germany, and the Cold War, just because, again, like I said in the previous question, it's just very recent, and there's so much of it to get into in Berlin, because obviously it was the focal point of those two eras. These kind of world-defining eras all happened here in Berlin.
Yeah.
And you as well?
I think for me, probably my favorite era is to talk about East-West divide, when Berlin was divided, not just Cold War-y, but really East versus West Berlin and Germany. Not necessarily in a competitive way, East versus West, but I find that so interesting, and I find it nuanced. And people have so many misconceptions about it. Like, they think they can pick out the architecture, and all the time people get it wrong. People always say, oh, look at that hideous Soviet building. And I'm like, yeah, we're in the capitalist Western bit. It's so much more nuanced than people think.
Definitely.
And I think that's such an interesting conversation. East Germany, I find an incredibly, incredibly interesting topic. And it helps that it is so recent. I always express it in this way to my young guests. If someone's 70 today and they came from the former East, they spent more of their life in socialist East Germany than they have in this modern reunified capitalist Germany. This is not ancient history. About a third of my friends' parents, they grew up in socialist East Germany, and not only their childhoods, it's where they fell in love. It's where they did their schooling. It's where they got their first career. It's where they got married. That's their most formative years was in that nation. So the recency, and that of course then also means that I know lots of people who remember it. I have a girlfriend who vividly remembers the day the wall fell. She was 12, and she's told me all her stories about it. It's also very stereotypical. She took the welcome money, went to KaDeWe, the big department store, ate her first doner kebab. My boyfriend is a Berliner, and his dad, he was living in the West, but he regularly went into the East. And I have his Stasi file. So the file that the East German secret police kept on him as this young West Berliner who kept going in and out. I have that file of this person who I know intimately.
That is crazy.
Really, really closely. So,
but see, it's things like that which make this living in Berlin, exactly, example of tangible history.
All the time on tours about the East-West divide, that period. Someone's like, oh yeah, I was a backpacker in the 80s and I crossed the border at Checkpoint Charlie, and these are my impressions of that one day. And all the time there's someone who was stationed in Germany during the Cold War, and all of those really personal connections, either from people I know or from the guests who come on tours. That really literally brings to life tours about the East-West divide for me. So I think that's probably my favorite.
Yes, and Tina is very right, because people miss the nuance here, because I think in the West we have such a black and white view of the Cold War. Capitalism won, therefore communism was bad. And the reality is it's so much more nuanced than that. Like I also know a lot of former East Germans who would very happily go back to life in the GDR, especially because life under capitalism has not turned out. Because to be fair, they were promised sunlit uplands. And for a lot of them, it hasn't turned out that way. Yeah, just always bear that in mind. A lot of history is nuanced. Not all history, the murder of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, that is not nuanced, okay? But things like the experience of communism,
super nuanced, super individual.
Exactly. Yeah. Just always bear that in mind. So question 3, which eras or topics don't you like? That's a good one. I would probably say I'm not a massive fan of alternative Berlin. I don't really like street art. I mean, I can appreciate street art and stuff, but I think this is what Berlin is very much known for these days is its, street art, its alternative scene. And, I am into it, but I'm not really into kind of explaining it to people. I kind of rather just sort of enjoy it and sort of I don't get into it as much as other people do,
as you do with the history.
And also because I don't get passionate about it because you probably understand this. I like to get very passionate about what I'm talking about because it's only then that people on your tour can also get excited about it. My aim in a tour is to make people
excited.
As excited about what I'm talking about, because that's how you get people interested, how you get them engaged, and I can't do that with alternative tours, and I end up just feeling bad.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than being on a tour with a guide where you're like, you don't care about this. And I'm sure your tours are never boring, but of course, if the guide's not passionate about it, how do you expect the person to be passionate about it? And so naturally, if you think, I'm not passionate about it, of course you're going to be in your head thinking this isn't a good tour. You're going to be thinking,
But you do alternative, don't you?
I do a lot of alternative. I would actually say that probably the best sold or requested tour category would be Third Reich, concentration camp, all involving that. And I reckon the second next most requested topic would probably be street art or like wild Berlin. I came to guiding for the history.
Although what don't you like?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah,
got on a sidetrack.
Oh, yeah. Nearly I was about to talk about why I do enjoy street art tours. Never mind, got sidetracked.
So no, let's just remind ourselves of the question. Which ones don't you like?
Okay, sorry. So, yes, I do lots of street art tours. But on the topic of which tours don't I like, I've been telling myself for years that I'm going to start doing Potsdam tours because there are lots of requests. And it is beautiful. It's nice to be surrounded by beauty, beautiful gardens, beautiful palaces. But I keep avoiding doing it because royal families bum me out, man. And I know that's such a strange thing to say from someone who spends so much of her life talking about the Nazis. But I don't know. I feel like we've learned a lot from the Nazis. We're trying to learn a lot from the Nazis. The royal families, I find it sad. I mean, like, this was the favorite palace of Frederick the Great. Yeah, that guy who was
forced to watch his lover be beheaded.
Yeah, by his dad.
Yeah, and then Wilhelm.
Yeah, Wilhelm II. Oh yeah, that guy. Yeah, how he was so violently pulled out of his mother during his birth that they disabled his arm, and then they basically tortured him trying to fix it.
Yeah, like putting the body of a freshly killed hare onto his arm, thinking that his arm would absorb the life
as it drained out of the animal. Then they tried stretching it. When he was born, his granddad wrote his father a letter. I'm unsure if I should congratulate my son on the birth of a defect child. Man, that's
You
sad.
can kind of understand why Kaiser Wilhelm was so
troubled.
Yes.
Doesn't justify starting a war that killed 18 million people. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm not surprised he had problems.
Yes, exactly.
So I find royal families a bummer.
Yeah.
Also, I have learned a lot because of
this. So again, hard to get passionate about it.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And I also find it problematic. People go to it wanting to enjoy the beauty. I enjoy the beauty, and so I know I'll bum them out if I talk about what a repulsive display of wealth it is. You look at when these Prussian kings are building palaces, not even to live in, but just to receive guests and to impress visitors, and a whole room lined with seashells. And you're thinking, during the Industrial Revolution, the average number of Berliners sharing a room was 6. The average working week was 60 hours, and that included children in labor. And that suffering of the masses led to the revolutions, which would then lead to the Nazi takeover, which would then lead to the communist Stalinist style oppression. And so in my head, like this inequality of wealth that's on display in Potsdam is a part of the story of all the suffering that came.
Yes.
And of course, like, you don't want to bum people out at Potsdam. They want to look at a beautiful palace. And I'm like, this is a part of how Hitler came to power. And so in my head, it's, I do still want to start doing Potsdam tours. I like the diversity. It is beautiful to be surrounded by beauty.
Yeah.
But there's a reason I've been avoiding Potsdam for so long, and it's because that whole like repulsive inequality of wealth that was embodied by the the system of the monarchy, I find icky. I don't totally know how to passionately and engagingly
how to square that hole.
Yeah, and how to present that to people in a way that they also can connect with. It's not a bummer.
Well, no, but it's nice. It's like me. You're just being honest, because in that regard, I think it would be very difficult for you to be able to get passionate about something that you disagree so strongly with.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so next question.
What is your favorite landmark and why?
Ooh, for me, call me #basic again, but probably TV Tower, the Fernsehturm.
Cute. I think that's adorable. Yeah.
It's just because. So the TV tower here in Berlin, it sticks up above everything because Berlin has a very flat skyline because it's built on a swamp. So everything that's like high has to be engineered very specifically to stop it from sinking. I do also think that it was built in 1969 and it still looks so futuristic.
Super modern.
Yeah, super modern. And also going up there in the ball, they have a rotating restaurant and it's all how it was back in the 70s. So and they have this super fast lift that gets you up there, 207 meters up. Yeah, I just think it's really cool. And you can use it as a marker for the city. You can tell where you are, like from in the skyline. I really, and also you can see it from really far away on the plane as well.
No,
and when I see it come into view, I'm like, oh, I'm home.
Yeah. That's quite romantic.
Yeah. What about you?
I think my favorite landmark is the Oberbaumbrücke. Mm-hmm. So that's the beautiful bridge that spans the River Spree between Friedrichshain, where the East Side Gallery is, the painted remaining bit of Berlin Wall, and over the river to Kreuzberg, which is one of my favorite. It connects two of my favorite districts.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It was designed in the 1890s to look like an old Margraviate Burg, like kind of the style of medieval castle that used to be common outside of Berlin. The center span was blown up by the Nazis at the end of the war, so it's modern. So when you look at it, you can kind of see those layers of history that make Berlin so interesting to nerds like us. There's a light installation at night where hands play scissors, paper, rock, competing between east-west because it used to be a border crossing location in the wall. I love it. The view from it's great. Excellent view of the TV tower. I think that's probably my favorite landmark in Berlin.
Nice. Yeah, I know. It's become a very iconic bridge and incidentally just up the road from where we're recording this. Next question. What topics or eras don't get enough attention?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I would say, personally, the ones that don't get enough attention are Imperial Germany. It's Imperial Germany and Weimar Germany. So, yeah, interwar Germany and the just pre-World War I Germany.
Yeah, I think, that's also a good point, pre-World War I. Yeah, I definitely think Weimar Germany doesn't get enough attention. Roaring 20s, but also the political lead up to the Third Reich. I think that's really the major context in which it's referenced.
Yeah.
I guess one of the reasons why it's so often overlooked is because it's hard to give good tours on things that aren't there anymore.
Yes, that's very true. That's
always a problem in Berlin because so much was bombed. It's been redesigned so many times. So often as a tour guide, you're like, here's a picture of what's not here anymore that used to be here.
Yes.
And there's a limit to how much
there's a limit how much you can get away with
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes like this memorial plaque talks about this famous variety performance hall that was iconic in the 20s where Marlene Dietrich was in the kick line, and you can connect people to a bit of that, but you can't do a whole 2-3 hour tour of stuff that's not there anymore.
Yeah, just with like your,
yeah.
True.
So I think that's one of the reasons why Weimar Berlin gets missed out way too much. There is one guy who does really fun time traveling tours, and I'm sometimes a guide for him in English. And that's such a cool concept. When you're driving around in the bus, there are screens in the bus that show footage of what that street used to look like at a particular point in time.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and this guy's a bit of a 20s expert, and so he does a lot of these time traveling bus 20s tours, and it's so much fun to give. And every single time I'm in that I'm doing that tour, I think, people should do this more often, because it was a completely different city and such an electric version of Berlin, the 20s.
Yes. I would say that's where you have the roots of what Berlin is today. Next question.
Okay, question 6. Biggest misconception about Berlin or Germany?
I mean, I'm going to say, for me, the biggest misconception is that Germany is efficient. What about you?
I think mine is very similar. So like efficient is kind of within my category. My answer would be Berlin is not Germany.
Yeah.
Like all of your stereotypes about Germanness, efficiency, conservative, religious, meat eating, obsessed with cars. What else have we got? All of your stereotypes about Germany are not applicable of Berlin. Berlin is totally different from the continent-wide highest rates of atheism to some of the highest rates in Europe of vegetarianism to the really high rates of green attitude, green thinking and voting. You know, so many people want Berlin to go car-free, although Germany is famous for its obsession with cars and their auto industry. I describe it often to my guests in this way, that if you look at a map of Germany right now, how it's voting, the nation is a sea of conservative and far-right votership, and Berlin's like a rainbow disco ball of hot pink in the middle. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that so often guests, they come with this mental image of Germanness, which often is actually formed from Bavaria and Oktoberfest entirely.
All of your stereotypes and kind of ideas about what Germany is come from
Bavaria, just one south in the state. And Berlin and Bavaria hate each other.
Yes, they really are not fans of each other. Yes. That's so true. For me, it's definitely the fact that, German efficiency, absolutely not a thing. I think this actually extends to the whole country, though.
Yeah, I guess that's a hard one to say. I mean, recently I was discussing this with, actually, I think I always discuss this with German guests on my tours, whether the seemingly constant delays or Ausfälle, the cancellations of trains, is that nationwide or is it just Berlin? The delays on construction and the openings of new projects. And people from elsewhere in Germany are telling me it's not unique to Berlin.
Just to be aware, you're not, not all stereotypes are correct. Always go and experience somewhere for yourself. I think that's very...
Yeah.
And form your own opinions before you let your opinions be influenced by someone else or by word of mouth. So, question number 7. What do you miss about your home countries?
That's easy for me. It's beaches.
Yeah.
I miss the beaches.
Because you come from subtropical Queensland.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I come from the UK. I think what I miss the most is probably banter, I mean, I will say I do still have banter here because a lot of my friends here are British. There's a lot of British people here and Australians, actually, and they have the same sort of banter. So, do still have some of it here. But I think just being in a place where you're all on this kind of level of understanding, I guess maybe that's something that I miss.
It is nice there's a degree of cheekiness in communication, like affectionate, friendly cheekiness that I think we have in British and Australian culture.
Yeah, which does not exist in German culture at all.
Very hard to safely translate.
Yes.
I recently actually had this realization. My parents were visiting, and so I'd been speaking English the whole time, and then like my dad and I put lots of dirt on each other, non-stop cheeky banter. And the waiter came and asked a question, and then I went to shoot back like a cheeky Australian style banter, but in German. And then halfway through the sentence, I realized, oh, no. Like that will not come over well. And so I got like, and just kind of like choked as I tried to retract the sentence that I realized should not come out of my mouth in the German language. And then it was fine. I just covered it over. And then someone said to me like, Tina, what was that? And I was like, I went to make a cheeky Australian joke. And then I realized that it would not fly well. That's
good though, because it does show how culturally sensitive you are.
Trying not to make enemies and offend locals wherever I go.
Yes, exactly. So I guess maybe that's something that I miss.
Question 8. If you could go back to and live in an era of Berlin history, which would it be and why?
That is a fantastic question.
Yeah.
For me, it would be 20s Berlin. So Weimar Berlin, 1920s Berlin, 80s West Berlin, or 90s Berlin. These 3 eras, I would say. 20s because it just looked amazing, progressive, very kind of what's the word? A very avant-garde, you know?
Yeah.
So not just like in terms of the parties, but also socially,
Yeah.
culturally. It was people just sort of, you know, just didn't really care so much about things that had mattered so much before the war, before the First World War. So things like about class and like, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Well, I mean, it's because the whole country was in chaos. So that was, I guess, the backdrop. But yeah, and then the 80s West Berlin, because it just looks like a wild, wild time because no one wanted to live here. So the people who did move here were the kind of people, because basically the West German government put in and the Americans put in incentives to get people to move here, and the incentives made a very certain demographic of people move here. And it was amongst this demographic that I really think the seeds of what Berlin is today formed, with like artists colonies and like all of this kind of stuff. And then 90s Berlin, just because I think that was really the height of, that was peak Berlin.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I love those 3 answers. I immediately feel hungover when I imagine all of those 3 scenarios. If I can determine my social status, my socioeconomic status, I think I also wanted to say 20s Berlin. Yeah, this idea of like, you're not censored for the first time. The royal family's gone. You have a democracy. Women can vote. I think there's so much hope around that time. Yeah. The art, the outfits, but of course the backdrop's dark.
Yes,
you know, like profound poverty,
undertone,
profound misfortune.
Also communists and nationalists fighting
on the streets. Yeah.
No,
and of course a lot of men shell-shocked or terribly disabled from the war or missing from the war. A lot of women effectively forced into prostitution. Yeah, so I'm like, I would love to be there, but
there's still all of these advancements that the human race still needs to make.
I think if I could go back and visit but not live, I would take the 20s. But if I'm living, I don't think I'd take the 20s. 80s, I totally get it. Amazing. I think though I would go, if I'm living, I'd go 90s. That, you know, this was sea of squats, as so much of the city was just empty. All of those wild West Berliners had then taken advantage of the now abandoned former eastern bits of the city, and they were making these artist houses, and techno had just come over from Detroit, and punks, and that kind of iconic West Berlin, Bowie inspired punks, new draft dodgers, hippies. That whole West Berlin zeitgeist has then just like exploded in 90s. Again, like, I'm not trying to glorify it. I know there's also that power vacuum that came from the collapse of socialism. The resurgence of neo-Nazism is clearly not what I'm there for. And I know that would have been very scary if you ran into the wrong people on the streets of 90s Berlin.
I didn't realize this. It's only when I went to see that. Have you seen that exhibition?
Oh, no, the new one at the CO. I haven't been yet.
Incredible.
Keen as a bean.
Yeah, it's about life just before and immediately after the wall fell. And I didn't realize that there was such a big surge in neo-Nazism.
The power vacuum of socialism's collapsed. What's next? There was a great reading at SO36, which is a club just
across the road
there, where David Bowie actually used to party when he lived here in the late 70s. And there was a great reading there of a man who wrote the book Punk in the DDR, so Punk in East Germany. And then he wrote a sequel about what happened after I was punk in East Germany. And I went to his readings of his books there. And he really, really nearly got beaten possibly to death by a bunch of skinheads in the 90s. Yeah, it was
crazy.
A real... still, I would still choose 90s Berlin, but I would try not to get beaten to death by skinheads.
No, but I 100% would as well, because 90s is it was the time where it was before, people like us ruined it.
Before the gentrification.
Yeah, before gentrification, and where there was...
The sound of Berlin.
Yeah, the sound of Berlin. Yeah, that very much is the sound of Berlin. But they are like... And also on our tours, they are obnoxiously loud.
Spectacularly loud sirens.
Really annoying.
Yeah, really, really loud.
Because it was before like gentrification and everything. But I don't know. It was just I don't know. It just looked like such an exciting time to be here. Before Berlin was sort of discovered. Yeah. Really.
I mean, literally imagine like West Berlin was an island of artists, punks, left, anarchist, hippies, and immigrants. And imagine that then the wall falls and like a big chunk of people move out of the socialist bits, And so basically then it's like a whole city playground. You could just move in and squat buildings. So imagine a city, a super rundown city that is just a giant free-for-all playground for artists, punks, lefts, anarchists, immigrants, and old socialists who didn't want to go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, because there's a few skinheads, neo-Nazis, but the majority of it is just this very interesting demographic of people have taken over an entire city.
Yes, exactly.
And no one expects the city to make any money. Like, everyone knows the city's a massive economic drain, and it will be kind of a decade before the big developments really start, and the squats are starting to get kicked out, and they're starting to posh it up.
So it's sort of, but yeah, in the 90s, Berlin was still very much had its vibe of all of the things that had happened. It still had the remnants of the war, of socialism, of being two different cities. It all still very much had the remnants, and it was people living in the spaces of these remnants, living amongst these remnants. And I just think that's what would have been so exciting.
Yeah.
See so much potential, but unfortunately that potential has been turned into capital, basically, into, expensive properties which no one can afford. And I mean, I guess, this is happening in every city around the world, every major city around the world. But yeah, it doesn't make it any less sad.
And it's been harder and faster in Berlin, where, other cities were constantly gentrifying like that, and corporate takeovers and commercial rents rising and rising, so that only bigger and bigger companies could afford to rent them. In other cities, that's just happened standard since I don't know when, end of the Second World War, industrialization, don't know. But after Berlin, that only started in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so that rate of gentrification, that rate has just been exponential in Berlin. It's been a rapid explosion, like the gentrification,
especially in about
of the cities.
The last 5-10 years.
Yeah, it's harder and faster.
Yeah, and I saw on the news yesterday, it said that rents in Berlin had doubled in 10 years. No, more than doubled in 10 years, which is kind of crazy. That's not our fault, though, is it?
No, we have nothing to do with that. As expats who moved into the city with our normalized higher rent prices.
Yeah, no, I'm a Berliner now, so I criticize those people.
I mean, I wouldn't pay a legally high rent. I do want to say that. That's something. Yes. I mean, I shouldn't say that. If I were on the edge of homelessness, maybe I would, but I would fight tooth and nail to avoid
of course,
illegally supporting someone who's overcharging on rent.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I guess this is a problem everywhere, really.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, guys. Well, that's it for part 1. So we're going to do part 2 in another video. So please, if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and also leave comments down below. And also, I will leave a link to Tina's website also down in the comments below. Cool. Okay. Thank you, guys. See you next time. Bye.